Just days ahead of G-20 summit in New Delhi on 9th and 10th September, Prime Minister Narendra Modi is visiting Indonesia to take part in 20th ASEAN-India summit. In Indonesia, Prime Minister Modi will also attend the 18th East Asia Summit, which brings together the 10 ASEAN members and 8 dialogue partners that include Australia, India, China, Japan, South Korea, New Zealand, Russia and the United States of America. India is not a member of ASEAN, but the mutually beneficial relationship has increasingly become important for ASEAN countries. This relationship between India and ASEAN countries dates back to the 1990s, when Prime Minister Narasimha Rao's government started the Look East policy in 1992. This was an strategic shift from previous Nehruvian thinking. When BJP government came to power in 2014, Prime Minister Narendra Modi upgraded India's Look East policy to Act East policy to add teeth to it strategically. Pandit Nehru gave so much importance to Indonesia that if we look back in the history, Indonesia's President Sukarno was the first chief of our Republic Day parade in 1950. However, on 11 September 1965 in Jakarta, a mob armed with stone, sticks and guns attacked the Indian embassy. The attack came after Foreign Minister Subadiryo of Indonesia said that India was committing aggression against Pakistan. This crowd raises slogans of "Crush India." The hand of Sukarno, the then President of Indonesia, was said to be behind this attack on the Indian embassy. The same Sukarno, whom Pandit Nehru called in 1950 as chief guest to attend India's first Republic Day parade. The reason for this attack was attributed to the war between Indonesia and Malaysia from 1963 to 1966 over the border dispute. India supported Malaysia on the issue. It was reported in media that time that being angry with India's stand, the President of Indonesia, Sukarno, got the Indian embassy attacked. Then Indonesia had the support of China in the war. During 1965 India-Pakistan war, Pakistan, Indonesia and China's collusion was at its peak. Archives published by media showed that soon after the Indian Army attack on Lahore front, the then Indian ambassador to US B.K. Nehru met the then President Lyndon Johnson, where he expressed concerns that the Indian government felt there was a clear Chinese-Pakistan-Indonesian understanding to put a triple squeeze on us. All three countries wanted to choke Andaman and Nicobar Island back then. 50 years have passed since then, since 1965 incident. Today Prime Minister Narendra Modi is going to participate in the summit of ASEAN countries in the same Indonesia. The only difference is that now Indonesia wants India's support to avoid falling into China's trap. Just to get a better perspective how relationship and scenario changed, we have to go back further in history. After the end of the Second World War in 1945, the countries of Southeast Asia got independent from the occupation of Japan and Western countries. Their war with Japan was over, but they started fighting amongst themselves over ideology and border issue. This was also the period of the ongoing Cold War between the US and the Soviet Union. In 1965, the Chinese-backed Sukarno government fell in a coup in Indonesia. After this, in 1966, the ongoing war between Malaysia and Indonesia also ended. However, America's war against the communists was still going on in Vietnam that point of time. Then in 1967, 5 countries of Southeast Asia forgot their mutual enmity and met in Bangkok. On 8th August 1967, 5 leaders, the foreign ministers of Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore and Thailand, sat down together in the main hall of the Department of Foreign Affairs building in Bangkok, Thailand, and signed a document. By virtue of that document, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, was born. These countries decided to increase economic partnership with each other, so the dispute of any kind would be no war between them, no Asian countries of 10 countries. That would be the motto of those Asian countries that point of time when the document was signed. And by now, the ASEAN is said to be the most successful platform of developing countries so far. India is not a member of ASEAN, but the relationship that started as a sectoral partnership in 1992 and graduated to full dialogue partnership in 1995 December and summit level partnership in 2002 has assumed much more significance in Modi regime. Since around 55% of India's trade passes through the South China Sea, in such a situation, it is important for India to maintain good relationship with these countries. Apart from this, due to maritime security, the importance of ASEAN countries increases further for India. The economic crisis in Asia in 1988 had increased the dependence of ASEAN countries on China. Taking advantage of this, China started establishing its dominance in the South China Sea. Due to this, only one option was left with ASEAN countries, and they started strengthening relationship with America. Now, according to experts, India is presenting itself as a third option in front of ASEAN countries.
This will be the 9th ASEAN-India summit to be attended by the Prime Minister. The summit, in a sense, is special since it is the first one after the elevation of India-ASEAN relationship to a comprehensive strategic partnership which happened last year. During the summit, Prime Minister will review the progress in ASEAN-India relations and provide them with further direction. India's relations with ASEAN are a central pillar of our Act East policy, as well as of India's vision of the wider Indo-Pacific. India and ASEAN have a comprehensive engagement covering a wide array of areas at all levels, including 7 ministerial engagements besides several official level ones. India and ASEAN share similar vision for the Indo-Pacific and are committed to building on the synergy between ASEAN's outlook on the Indo-Pacific and India's Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative. This year, ASEAN is the chair. This year, Indonesia is the chair of ASEAN. The theme of their chairship is ASEAN Matters, Epicentrum of Growth. Within this framework, Indonesia organized a flagship event, ASEAN Indo-Pacific Forum, to implement ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific. This is an event which is focused on increasing connectivity of ASEAN to the Indo-Pacific by involvement of businesses and industry. So it's a track 1.5 event which they have organized.
To discuss PM Modi's Jakarta visit, I am being joined by Professor Pankaj Jha, Director of CESCube and Center for Security Studies. Welcome, Professor Pankaj Jha. There is a lot of developments which had happened between ASEAN and India. We had started direct flight to Indonesia and Vietnam, and we had started digital payment with Singapore. ASEAN-India Youth Summit was held in February this year, wherein some 175 youth took part. So that was also a big development. Besides, we had held a conference on traditional medicine in July, which focused on the pandemic, and India-ASEAN Comprehensive Strategic Partnership, Maritime, Digital Economy, cyber security, and there are new emerging areas which could be part of the discussion at the ASEAN India Summit. In May 1st, ASEAN-India exercise was held last year in December. First Asian Defence Minister meeting was also held. We had trade and business ties integral to our relations with ASEAN. The 5th ASEAN-India Business Summit was held in March this year in Kuala Lumpur with the aim to enhance business connectivity and supply chain resilience. In 2022-23, India-ASEAN bilateral trade of $131.5 billion was done in a year. That accounts for over 11% of India's trade for the year and was also the second highest after India-European Union trade. During ASEAN-India's economic ministers meeting earlier in August, the two sides started the review of ASEAN-India Trade in Goods Agreement and agreed for its completion by 2025. This ATEGA agreement is to make trade more friendly and facilitate and diversify the trade. With this perspective, Dr. Pankaj Jha, I just want to know how do you see the relationship between the ASEAN and India, and the countries which are part of the ASEAN and the dialogue partners also, because there are many dialogue partners this time?
When you look into this India-ASEAN partnership, particularly strategic partnership, we are trying to really elevate it into other sectors as well. And when you look into India-ASEAN Action Plan 2021-25, we have already talked about maritime security. We have talked about quick impact projects, which are very short-term projects and which are primarily meant to benefit communities and societies. We are also working in the field of pandemic research, medicines, digital economy, green economy. And I believe that the amount of interaction that we have both from defense and strategic point of view, particularly we have defense cooperation agreement with nearly 9 ASEAN member countries, which clearly showcases that we want to see ASEAN as our geopolitical strategic space where we want to really work and work not only in strategic space but political, economic and cultural spaces as well. And this is one of the reasons that Prime Minister Modi is going to visit and attend the ASEAN Summit as well as East Asia Summit. With regard to dialogue partners, we already have very good relationship with Japan, Korea, Australia, US and others, and which clearly signifies the importance and the central role, the pivotal role that India plays with regard to East Asia Summit as well.
All right, this summit is happening just a day or two before the G-20 summit, and Prime Minister Modi, he has to rush to Indonesia to take part in this crucial meeting. How do you see this development and coping up with a lot of challenges, because G-20 preparations, they are round the corner, so many guests are coming, and Prime Minister Modi's schedule, how important this summit becomes in the backdrop that G-20 summit is on the eve of this?
When you look into India's participation in G7 and then hosting of the G20 and participating in many other forums like BRICS and also expansion of the BRICS, which has happened very recently, I think India is acting as a bridge between North and South. And it is also resonating the voices of the global South, which talks about technology, climate change, climate finance, digital economies, and which clearly signifies the fact that it should not be lopsided growth at the global level. And India being one of those knowledge partners, one of those countries which have a lot of stakes with regard to knowledge, innovation, technology and all those things, I think is very comfortably placed in between North and South. And the role India will play, particularly when India has posed Africa also into the G20 summit meetings, clearly signifies that it needs to look into how the resources are exploited in a sustainable way, how the communities have benefited, and how the nations which are on the underdeveloped or developing countries should benefit from the large exchange with regard to knowledge, innovation, finance, and developing infrastructure at a global level, which will benefit all across the world. So I think this is what is called very important moment for India to rise up and showcase to the world what it stands for.
Coming to very specific questions, since China is a challenge to all the regional powers, regional countries, and especially the standoff which we have with China, given in that scenario, how important is to arm those nations surrounding China? So how do you see the defense deals happening between ASEAN countries and India, and how big is the scope for India?
As I talked about, we have a maximum of ASEAN countries. We have defense cooperation or memorandum of understanding on defense issues. We have logistics support agreement, and we are also working with regard to developing our presence through training and also maintenance purposes. And we see that we have already done with the case of Malaysia, which uses the same kind of equipment, Russian equipment. With regard to Vietnam, we are already helping them with regard to submarine training, with regard to maintenance of their Sukhoi aircraft and Mk-30 MKV. And we are also looking into Myanmar, which is one of those areas where Chinese dominance has been very prominent in the defense and strategic sectors, and clearly signifying that how we are going to look into it. If you look into one of the concepts which was proposed, that double fish strategy, where we look into engaging these ASEAN nations, particularly Indonesia, and developing its Sabang port, we want to counter the string of pearls strategy of China, which is seen as a concept. And we do believe that ASEAN countries are one of the important elements in this regard. We don't want to say that India will be very actively engaged in countering China, but we will make certain structure with regard to communications, with the logistics support, maintenance, where ASEAN countries will be more than willing to come on board and they, like in the case of Indonesia, their defense industries are not in a very good shape. But we need more, more capacities to develop our naval platforms, because already our shipyards are overbooked. And we want these kind of engagements which is there. There was also talk at one point of time of ASEAN defense industry, which is still a work in the progress. But we believe if ASEAN itself developed its own capacities, it will not have to rely too much on Chinese arms imports. And this will be very good for India to provide that kind of technical acumen as well as support to developing that kind of infrastructure and all those things. In terms of UN peacekeeping missions as well, we have been supporting many of the nations in terms of training them with regard to international protocols and the efforts that they need to do. And I think we are very well placed in supporting ASEAN in this regard.
Before I come to East Asia Summit, which we are founder member of, I want to understand, there's a whole lot of talk going on in media also. There are rumors that we may be arming Vietnam with BrahMos. But however, we lost Tejas deal with Malaysia, has been reported in various quarters of the media. How do you see this deal?
With regard to BrahMos, we already have given it to Philippines. We have trained the technicians as well as operations guys in this regard. Vietnam wants a very sophisticated naval version of the BrahMos, where it can really counter China in one way or another. They have taken our suggestions with regard to development of their frigates, which they have imported from Russia, as well as submarines, because they took note of our operating experience with regard to kilo-class submarines, and they've taken due cognizance of it. Now the thing is that BrahMos itself, Indonesia was also interested at one point of time, but we do have certain concerns with regard to end-user agreement and also how these things will be used. Because anyhow, China will be accusing us for aggravating tensions in South China Sea by giving all these peripheral countries which are claiming to the South China Sea and arming them with BrahMos, which is one of the areas. But anyhow, given the fact that there is a lot of tensions which are still happening in South China Sea, I believe India will have to act on its own and decide what is the best course of action. Yes, BrahMos might be coming to Vietnam, but when, I'm not very sure about that.
Well, China in the recently released map has included all the countries, all the areas, of 9-dash line. That includes Taiwan and South China Sea. So Indo-Pacific has become a bone of contention. And since India being the founding member of the East Asian Summit, so how do you see this dialogue with the partner countries? Since Indo-Pacific, I believe that is going to be the forefront of the discussions.
I think when you look into the Chinese illusion, Chinese rise is peaceful, that illusion is completely decimated. Nobody believes that China's rise will be peaceful because it's more assertive, it's more aggressive all across, in terms of economic dealings, in terms of BRI project itself. If you evaluate most of the BRI projects in and across Southeast Asia, many of the countries have reduced that, the project size as well as the involvement of China into it. Apart from that, if you look into the political interactions at different levels, you find China is seen with apprehension. There are doubts. ASEAN as a whole, as a unit, itself is now thinking about strategic autonomy, because they believe that until you are not balancing yourself between China and US, there will be certain apprehensions which will be caused with regard to ASEAN standing as a centrality, ASEAN centrality, and how it is really going to evolve in the near future. Moreover, Chinese, cartographic aggression, which we call it every now and then, it will be a passive, because we believe that China will be drawing maps from its own dreamland and will be posing it across. Even when, with regard to Philippines, they have proposed a map where they said there was a 60-meter pagoda on a 4-foot rock at one point of time. So that kind of a stories and these kind of concocted narratives which China is making, nobody will believe, and it will be a thing of the past, because it needs an international recognition. And maybe we should also revise our approach with regard to Tibet and other issues and tries to give them in the Chinese checkers way. That's the best possible option.
Yes, certainly, as you rightly said, China is losing face across all the domains across the world, and India's soft power is rising day by day as PM Modi talks of Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam and raising the voice of Global South. Thank you for speaking to National Defence, Professor Pankaj Jha. Thank you indeed.
Thank you.
According to SIPRI Military Expenditure Database 2023, ASEAN's military expenditure increased from $20.3 billion in 2000 to $43.2 billion in 2021. From 2002 to 2007, this was below $30 billion annually. Since 2015, ASEAN countries spent $41 billion or more, the highest being $44.3 billion in 2020. All eyes are set on PM Modi amid the India name change row that emerged after invitations of G-20 dinner had President of Bharat, and PM's Asia-India Summit booklet mentioned him as Prime Minister of Bharat. Indonesia and ASEAN countries had traditional ties as they have many Hindu temples and roots of Sanatan Dharma. India believes in Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. I believe the visit of Honorable Prime Minister just before the G20 summit will add feather in the cap of India being a great soft power. Thanks for watching National Defense. Jai Hind, Vande Mataram.